Hello and welcome to the Attic. My name is December, and today we are going to talk about the young adult fantasy which you definitely haven't read. So let's get started. Now, the young adult fantasy genre has been done so much in the past few years that the only way for a story to be distinct and memorable is through its execution and the author's style. This is what Valentina Ignatova's debut novel relies heavily on, and unfortunately fails, somehow managing to avoid the most popular cliches and still ending up a strange, confused work. The Covenant, Elements in the Blood, is a traditionally published novel that came on the market in 2020. It is the first and currently only novel both in the Covenant series and for the author, and it attempts to tackle the nostalgia of a childhood long gone and the desperate attempt to cling to the innocence and simplicity of the early years while opposing them to the primal greed for power and eternal life. Now, the novel is very much character driven, which means that the events of importance are very few, with long descriptions of the last summer of the childhood in between. The goal is for the characters to feel the said nostalgia, but also for the readers. Early events of the story capture the childhood of a whole generation, but what is odd is that the target demographic is actually not the same generation which would experience this nostalgia. What did this mean? As a young adult story, and the characters being at around the age of 16 or 17, the target demographic for this novel would be for readers between 12 and 18. But readers of this age would not have experienced the childhood that is being described in the story. They would not be able to relate to the characters, and it most definitely wouldn't make them think about their past with a nice smile and good memories. Younger readers do not share this past, and older readers usually look for a different type of stylistic choices. Talking about the novel being character driven, this review will not focus on the plot at all, because while said plot would be completely spoiled, the plot is the least interesting side of the story from a technical point of view. What is actually the plot, just so we know exactly what we're talking about, is a rather simple hero development story. And also it's an attempt at the found family trope, but it doesn't succeed in either. So what is actually the book about? Five friends meet for one last summer of helping their grandparents, who all have guest houses in a remote mountain village. Their first guests are two German researchers, who they take to a cave as they are working there as tour guides. They go to a cave to dig for clues for a mystery, and then at some point one of the researchers pulls out a gun. The teenagers manage to get away, and later they themselves go back to the mountain, finish the ritual the scientists wanted to do, and acquire superpowers. That's about it. Now, while this does sound like quite the exciting adventure, almost the entire book is the characters talking. Action or plot progressing scenes are short, strangely sped up, or even happen fully off screen, leaving the reader to spend almost the entire book observing the vulgarity of hormone-filled dialogue and inconsistent characterization. As mentioned, with the story being character driven, the most important part are the characters and how they develop as people throughout the story. So let's begin with the protagonist. Now, the characters have been cited to be the best part of the story, so going through them in detail is imperative to understanding why and how the book excels or fails to achieve its goals. And while the usual five people plot would not have a protagonist per se, In this story, there is a protagonist, there is a love interest, and then there is a lot of confusion. So, the actual protagonist is Kirill, who prefers his friends to call him K. He is 17, he is coming to help his grandmother for the summer, as his father comically cannot figure out what a 17-year-old boy would want to do in the capital of the country during the summer. Apparently, the idea of him wanting to find a job and just relax out of school is so impossible to understand for a man in his 40s that he just has to ship his son 250 kilometers away on a dingy bus to a place that's about as remote as physically possible in the developed world. Kirill plays in a metal band, has a guitar, and does not miss either of those things for the entire length of the summer. He never even once thinks about music. He doesn't think about his friends, his bandmates, they just don't exist outside of the bubble the story happens in. As a character, he is directionless. While protagonists are usually good at ending up where the plot is, Kirill is good at shifting his personality to fit whatever the plot needs him to be. He can be both gentle and quick to anger. He can be jealous and indifferent. He can be teasing and violent. And usually those personality switches happen within literal paragraphs of each other. It's not like at the beginning he is this quick to anger, volatile person and then mellows out by the end. No, he literally switches characterization in the middle of the page. He does mention a panic attack on the second page of the first chapter, which is quite interesting, or it would be quite interesting if it ever came back, but it doesn't. The author, with him and every other male character, attempts to subvert the expectations and write actual realistic teenagers, because apparently there is an understanding that young adult novels are not written the way teenagers speak, which might be true, but the author tries so hard she ends up on the other end of the spectrum. As the reader spent most of the time in Kirill's head, his thoughts in theory they see best, and while it really could be more realistic, it just unpleasant. It just gets unpleasant at some point. Now, Kirill is the type of protagonist who doesn't need redemption. Usually the protagonists either don't want to be a hero or they need to redeem themselves from something they've done, but in this case it is the simple story of a weak character acquiring power and then winning through the strength of his bonds with his friends. He doesn't have a dark past, he is never unpleasant to Christina, or he is never unpleasant to Christina in a way that shows that the author purposefully wrote him to be unpleasant to her. I'm not saying he's always nice to her, because he's not. In theory, the story should be about him saying goodbye to his childhood and becoming a man, because again, he's 17. This is potentially going to be the last time he does the thing which he's been doing through his entire childhood, because in the future he's going to start getting more adult responsibilities. So he's visiting his nostalgic childhood one last time to experience it and then to say his farewells. The readers are supposed to be empathetic towards him. They're supposed to like him, enjoy being in his head, and enjoy being around him, because again, he's supposed to start like a decent human being and then just grow up and mature. The issue is that Kirill is not a sympathetic character. He is not someone the reader roots for. He is just there and the reader doesn't have a choice. Whatever crumbs of personality he has show him as irresponsible, volatile person led by his libido and whatever the situation needs him to do, and worst of all, whatever the situation needs him to be. All the way through the beginning of the book, before the plot even starts, he thinks how happy he is that Christina would not be there. They do have a past, not romantic past, in his because in his mature 17-year-old brain, And he's supposed to be mature. He's supposed to be almost an adult, especially considering all the things he does later. So in his 17-year-old mind, he remembers her as the last time he saw her when she was actually 11. She had braces, she had freckles, and there were no other children around their age in this godforsaken village, she stuck to them and she wanted to play with them. For the record, Christina is 1 year younger than them, so it's not like they were teenagers and she was a 4-year-old dragging herself after them. No, she was 1 year younger and she was just wanted friends and not to sit alone with her grandmother. Unfortunately, her very existence and her very presence ruined his summer so much that he considers her the most annoying creature to ever walk the mountains, even though nothing that he describes, which supposedly she does and that he dislikes her about, is something she had any control over, especially being a child. This is the opinion he comes to the village with, and then he does a full 180 when he sees her because, and this is canonically correct, because she has developed some curves. Her body has developed to a point, and he is experiencing the hormonal urges of his age when looking at her. And this happens several times throughout the novel, for him to be so distracted by her, and especially the way she looks, that important things just happen because the main character is distracted by a girl. This happens the first time when he almost smacks face first into her and then goes completely speechless because she has cleavage and shorts. Another example is when they're in a cave being held hostage and yet he manages to steal the gun from the villain. They're about to escape and then he looks in her sad big green eyes and he's so entranced by them that the villain just snatches the gun out of his hand without any resistance. Again, this is something that happens and this is something we need to sympathize with. He thinks about her all the time, and for a story that's not meant to be romantic, it's spoken about so much. Especially, this is something I'm going to mention a bit further, in a slightly different way, that it does get old quite soon, and unfortunately, the author didn't get the memo that this can get old, as the description of her and his infatuation with her, is something that follows him through the entire book. Kiddo is supposed to be the responsible one, the leader, the brave one. The author tries to show how amazing he is by displaying his care for his grandmother, but this by itself isn't enough, mostly because we see him interact with her less than half a dozen of times. He has no personality, and he has way too many conflicting characteristics for him to be one stable individual we can actually root for or even think about as a whole character. He is unpredictable, true, but it's not because he has a quick temper or some kind of magical issues. No, it is simply because the author in every situation has to decide what she needs the protagonist to be, and then she writes him like this, which unfortunately means that he behaves like a completely different person in every other chapter, or not even chapter, every other paragraph. He's not a well-written character at all. He also does get control over the element of fire because of course he does. The character we meet after Kirill is Nikolai, and things go downhill from there. Um, and I mean, we literally meet him right after we meet Kirill, as on the first page, Kirill is talking about how he is going to the village on the bus and how Nikolai is actually on the same bus and Kirill is trying to avoid being recognized. Which he does say it so he can get a little bit of quiet on his trip, but also he must be aware that in an almost empty bus going to a remote, almost uninhabited village in the mountains, the only other person who is his age is going to notice him. And he does. Now, Nikolai is the friend that nobody likes. That's the short of it, that's the long of it. He is just there for the characters, the plot, and even the author to dump all of their negative emotions. Nobody likes him, he knows it. Now, a bit more detail about him. The characters hate Nikolai because how he dresses, because of how he talks, and because he has actual ambition. His actual ambition is just to work in one of the hotels his father owns. It's not some great, amazing, incredible ambition. He doesn't dream of being the next billionaire. He likes what his father does because his father owns hotels and he wants to be part of it. He is the son of obviously a wealthy businessman. He wears designer, and even at 17, he's already focused on networking. And his biggest sin in the beginning of the book is having a rich father. That's the only reason they dislike him. Also because as children, he used to be the one who was actually cautious when they were out wreaking havoc around the mountain. He is the one who would be afraid they would get in trouble when they were doing something they should have gotten in trouble for, and they just couldn't stand the voice of reason being an actual child. Also, he, unlike all of them who apparently have Greek god level of physique, Nikolai actually is a little chubby. The horror. But it's not just the characters. The author herself doesn't like Nikolai. She actually goes out of her way to show this displeasure and disdain. And while some of it she could try to pass as character voice, it's just so obvious she just wants him gone and she wants one of them to suffer, and it always has to be Nikolai. What does this mean? The canon itself hates Nikolai. For example, Kirill makes fun of the way Nikolai dresses in his head, but the author had to be the one to think, here's this 17-year-old, this is how he's going to be dressed for a 250-kilometer ride on an old, potentially smelly bus. Or this is how he's going to dress for a 12-hour hike. Also, why is him being dressed becoming such a problem? Because it is mentioned multiple times in the book how he dresses with more detail than anyone else. And how he dresses is like a 50-year-old white American politician playing golf. He wears pressed pants, he wears pressed dress shirt. It's not fun. Nikolai is also the only one who respects Christina's choice, because there is this really strange dynamic in the book when it comes to romance and relationships, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later. But after she makes her choice known, or her supposed choice, because it is a bit soap opera-ish, Nikolai is the only one who just accepts it and says, okay, I'm happy, we're going to just be friends, and then he doesn't attempt to pursue her anymore. Everybody else just, it's free real estate. Something really, really important that shows how much the author needed a scapegoat. Well, she didn't actually need it, she just wanted one, and she decided everything bad has to happen to Nikolai, is how the characters vocalize how much they dislike him and how much he actually knows this. He is fully aware that none of them actually cares about what he does, how he feels. They just want him gone. They will never be his friends, and he still says that this is better than what he has at home. So the author basically wrote a lonely, cautious, careful child who has his plan for life, and then she tried to make him the most unlikable character in the entire book. She failed, so she just made everyone hate him for no reason. In the end of the book, actually, the others get him out of a cave because all of them end up being hurt in a cave, kind of locked inside, but they manage to get out, and they do help him to get out because he's the one who got hurt the most. He is barely conscious, and because they get him out of a life or death situation when he's completely helpless, he thinks they must really be his friends now, which is just sad. Another way the author shows how much she really dislikes this character which also raises the question, why did she write the character in the main group of friends whom she so much dislikes, is that when they get their superpowers, Nikolai is the only one whose divine warrior doesn't show up, because the way those superpowers work is the teens finalize a ritual performing a blood sacrifice. Each one of them puts their blood on some sigils on an altar, and then they enter a contract with divine warrior spirits from a different land who were locked in our world. And through this contract, they get to control those divine warriors' powers, which are linked to different elements, while the divine warriors themselves become visible and they can guide them, and they also cannot be way too far away from them geographically. So each and every of the 5 friends gets a divine warrior assigned to them and a superpower to control, basically. Nikolai is the only one who gets kind of an odd superpower, and also his divine warrior is confirmed to exist, to be kind of as alive as the others, but he's the only one who doesn't actually show up. So Nikolai is left to learn how to handle his powers by himself. Also, he's the one, a bit of a side note, he's the one who suffers the most from the process of entering this contract, as the others just kind of, the events simmer down, while for him, his eyes don't stop glowing, so even long after the ritual, he still has to wear sunglasses because his eyes are just glowing, and he has to hide it. He doesn't get the real super cool powers that the others get. So some of them, so Kiddo gets super strength. One of the other boys gets the ability to control stone and rocks and all that jazz. The other boy can control emotions and can actually influence people, and it is shown to be so strong that it basically is mind control. And the one female character gets manifestation powers, which is also super useful when she's really, really strong. What Nikolai gets is premonition. Not only does his condition render him unconscious for a whole day while the others are slowly gathering their wits to them, but he sees all the shadows, he sees all of the possible outcomes, and it's up to him to actually stop them. This is something which is shown in one scene where he sees one of the adults they're actually friends with fall from a cave and die, and this is basically like a vision, so he manages to stop it. But that's the thing, he has to live with seeing this, and he's the only one who sees it. So Nikolai basically got the short stick on his guide, meaning he doesn't have a guide, unlike literally everyone else, on his powers, because his powers give him the glowing eyes, which he has to hide, and also give him the ability to see horrible things happen 24/7, and to also give him the responsibility to prevent them, which is even worse. He's the one the plot purposefully leaves behind and punishes him for crimes the author really had to make a reach to come up with. What are those crimes? Well, he, for some reason, is absolutely sure that after the evil scientists leave, they're going to send their shady organization, their shady German organization, to come and sue them because they left their equipment up in the cave. That's it. The author tries so hard to write him as insensitive, money-driven, and emotionless. But by that point, it really doesn't matter, mostly because the other characters are actually shown to be much worse. Also, for the record, Nikolai is a full part of the main group. So they hike together, they go to the cave together with the evil scientists, they do the ritual together, etc., etc. He's not someone who they find in the last chapter and he just kind of appears there so they can ignore him. No, they have known him forever. He actually goes to the same school as Kiddo, and yet this is what the author decides to go with. Another attempt at being progressive, aside from being extremely vulgar, is the author writing two canonically bisexual characters. One of them is Maxim, who is the third male character in the five-person group, and also the second canonically bisexual character is his spirit, his divine warrior, the ghost, the magic ghost who attaches himself to him. Now, Max is openly and canonically bisexual. His brother comments on this, and he's seemingly pursuing both Kirill and Christina. And it is really, really strange. This is something which is going to be discussed a bit later, the way the bonds and relationships fluctuate in this group of five people. But in his interactions with Kirill, actually, is where Kirill fails as a character. Well, he does fail on multiple places, but this is just a bit odd. Because Kirill is fully aware he's being chased, he's being pursued, he's being courted, and he's shown to not really care about this, so this doesn't really, bother him, except for the times when the author needs him to be violent, aggressive, which is when it suddenly bothers him and he becomes verbally and physically aggressive about it. But again, and then it just goes back to him not caring about it. It is very, very odd. Talking about Maxim's strange fascination with both Kirill and Christina, what's really, really difficult to figure out is whether he wants to be in Kirill's place, meaning to be in a relationship with Christina, whether he wants to be in Christina's place, meaning to be in a relationship with Kirill, or if he wants to be between them, or if he just wants the two of them to never get together. It's such a strange way, the way he behaves, because it doesn't make sense. He doesn't seem to know what exactly he wants. And it doesn't help the plot at all. Max being bisexual is actually nothing more than an attempt, because the author of the book, she really, really wanted to have a queer character, but for some reason she didn't think to write a regular character and to just have him also be attracted to men. No, she had to write a predator. Both of the canonically queer characters, Maxim and his divine warrior, are some of the really, really worst representation I've seen in young adult books, because they're both just horrible people, but specifically their sexuality is used in a way to show how horrible people they are. So what does this mean? They're not just normal, regular people who happen to not be straight. For example, Maxim is very pushy, both towards Kirill and Christina. He's pushy verbally, he's pushy physically. Kirill suspects him doing everything he can to get close to him physically, within touching proximity. And of course, there is the amazing scene which could never be missed, which is just Kirill carrying Christina because she was unwell, so he has her in his arms in a princess carry, and Maxim just comes and kisses him without asking for consent or permission, especially when he is aware that Kirill does not return his feelings and that Kirill is in fact straight. It is such an awkward situation, but at least the other characters also seem to feel a bit awkward when it happens. But still, Kirill being occasionally volatile, violent, and physically aggressive person for some reason doesn't put Christina down and break his teeth, because he threatens to do that over smaller things. Maxim doesn't seem to be able to make his mind again, what he wants, who he wants, and what he wants to do with them. So somehow the one main character who is queer is just a very confused predator, which doesn't stop him from being horrible, but it just makes him even more inconsistent. Now, Maxim has a twin brother who is the fourth male character in the main group. This is Alexander, and he's there to be the comic relief, maybe, because he's not funny, but he's also not much else. So he's supposed to be a foil to his brother. So he's supposed to be the jokester who is trying to hook up with everything female within a 10-mile radius, while Maxim is a bit more reserved, a bit quieter, and he is purposefully chasing Kiro and Christina. The issue is that the author didn't balance them out, so we do have quite a lot of personality on Maxim's side, which it's not a good personality, but it is there. So while he doesn't seem to know exactly what he wants as a character, as his personality, he is very consistent. And so is his brother. He consistently doesn't have a personality. He's just there to be vulgar towards Christina, make jokes, and that's it. He's shown to be quite caring a couple of times, but in the big picture, he's just there. He's also the best example of one of the main problems with the book, which I'm going to go over a bit further. The only thing that needs to be mentioned here is that his divine warrior is the only woman in the group, so somehow the big surprise, said no one ever, is that the main group is 4 guys and 1 woman, and their divine warriors are again 4 guys and 1 woman. But Christina's divine warrior is male? Yes. While Alexander's divine warrior is the woman. And he gets to control the element of the moon and also to influence people's emotions. Again, him influencing people's emotions it's so powerful, it's on the verge of mind control. And something you need to be aware of about Alexander, the moment he learns this due to 2 separate accidents within 5 minutes of each other, when he learns that he can in fact control people's emotions to the point where they would do things they usually wouldn't do, is he thinks that now any woman he wants, they wouldn't be able to refuse him and he would be able to get them in bed. That's the comic relief. He is not joking. He's completely serious. He's 17, and the moment he learns he can influence people's emotions, he thinks he's going to use them to water down the idea of consent. Amazing. Also, something a bit strange about him is how dismissive he is of his own divine warrior. Again, the spirits are there to be guides with their powers, but also in their transformation from children to adults. But his divine warrior again is a scantily clad woman who, when he disrespects her the first time because a woman is telling him to respect her, she proves she can and in fact would physically torture him without lifting a finger. Her friends also don't care about it. They don't care about him enough to try to stop her, and to them this is completely normal behavior, while Alexander spends a few minutes writhing on the floor in hell agony because she is literally torturing him. And once this is done, he still argues on every step of the way. He obviously has no idea what self-preservation means because she did it once, she's going to do it again, probably. And while she is no angel, he never even pauses to think that it might be in his best interest to not piss off the woman who can make him beg for death. He just goes straight through it and just keeps being super dismissive of her. He is irrational, and he's just there to be the comic relief and to talk without much substance. He also potentially doesn't know how to count. Yes, one of the main characters. The final member of the main group is the token female character. And Christina is 1 year younger than everyone else again. She is also the most baffling personality in the entire story. So, some characters are inconsistent in that they either inconsistent in their personality or they are inconsistent as to whether they have a personality, or they consistently have switching personalities. Christina's personality is very consistent. She is very much, she is the most focused character, as in the writer was most focused when they were characterizing her. But her behavior makes zero sense in so many ways that it is just every time anything comes out of her mouth, or if we're in her mind, every thought she gets is just straight up baffling. Nothing she says or does is appropriate for the situation. In which she's on the receiving end of remarks, she acts like a teenage boy's fantasy and not a 16-year-old girl. So she looks and acts the way teenage boys think teenage girls act. She is not written in a way that an adult woman who has been this 16-year-old girl at some point in her life would write behavior. Now, Christina has spent 5 summers away from the village, and also this is going to be her last summer that she can do it, because after this she is moving to Germany to live with her aunt and go to college there. This is also how she gets roped into entering the plot, because she has studied German extensively. Her grandmother asked her to be interpreter for a couple of German researchers who are coming a bit early to go around the caves and look for some old mystery they learned about. Christina is... her personality is consistent, but she is not a person. She's a stereotype. She's a plot device. The reader knows she's beautiful, as it is mentioned more or less on every single page by every single male character. Because all 4 boys, the man at the village, a lawyer older than her father, and her own divine warrior, they're all struck speechless every time they see her. They just look at her and marvel at her beauty. Again, she's 16. Her divine warrior, as Hyun, spends every dialogue line he has proclaiming to the heavens and anyone who would listen how beautiful she is. That's all he does. And also Kirill's divine warrior just tells him that yeah, she's hot, but he has to keep her on a shorter leash because she actually talks back, and we can't have women talking back. Again, this is said by someone whose fellow divine warrior is in fact a woman. Christina herself, with her questionable decisions, actually defends a man who almost kills them multiple times and is actively trying to take over the world. Because, and this is a direct quote, he is simply following his dream. Anyone would do the same in his place. Now, would everyone who has had any dream ever endanger the lives of so many people and blow up dynamite inside a mountain which can collapse on top of their heads? Also, potentially get people for human sacrifices, also threaten to shoot underage kids who for some reason don't want to be sacrifices. Would every single one of us as people do this for a dream? Who knows? But Christina apparently thinks that. She also does cry when Kirill snaps at her in response to this same statement. Since he has been held at gunpoint, the evil researcher actually beat him up quite a few times, and yet Christina is defending those researchers. And then she despairs at how rude he is when he snaps at her. How, yes, he was within his right to refuse to help tourists, but he didn't need to talk to her with such anger. And she does also mention how he is within his right to refuse to help tourists who tried to destroy protected flora and fauna in the mountain, while completely ignoring the fact that those same tourists tried to kill her and her friends and use them as human sacrifices. She's not the most rational, she definitely isn't big on the brain department. Christina is physically affectionate when she should know this would not be wanted. in the same situation, they're being held hostages by the evil German researchers who still have the gun. Kiddo snaps at her and kind of shouts at her because, again, she's defending the people who beat him up and potentially cracked the rib. Those same people are trying to free a god who's going to help them to take over the world, and those same people try to collapse a mountain on their heads. And he's obviously upset with her, and at this point, they aren't together yet. Well, they're never officially together, they just make out a few times, but by this point, they have never done anything remotely romantic. They haven't held hands, they haven't kissed, they haven't talked about romance or them. So they're sitting together. Kiddo is angry, silent, just ignoring her, and she thinks it's perfectly okay to just go and rough off his hair, and when he just glares at her, she is so heartbroken she cries. But she's also confused because she isn't sure why he would be upset about this touch. Which, yeah, it's not good. It's really not good. Christina hates arguments, especially when she's on the losing side, on the side of the minority. And this really upsets her, which usually would be normal because who wants to be on the side of the minority in an argument and be losing simply because the other person is speaking louder? Nobody wants that. The issue is, again, as with the follow your dreams or the tourist's statement, is that she seems to forget that the losing side she's defending is this of mass murderers who want to kill them, who want to take over the world. But no, she's just wondering why none of her friends is seeing this as the beginning of their great adventure, while she again completely misses the gun, which was literally pointed at all of them at some point, and how they almost died. So Christina she might be a realistic 16-year-old, but she has, as in some 16-year-olds might have negative amounts of common sense, but she is just not a good character. She is just there to make the plot happen, and the way she makes the plot happen is by being completely useless at best and to completely hinder everyone else at worst. Her arguments are invalid simply because of who she defends. Also, she's this most strangely gullible teenager in the world. Because while teenagers can be a bit trusting as they're still growing up, they're usually very cynical of certain things. And yet when someone tells her that, oh, there used to be this cult that traveled from Northern Europe all the way down to Bulgaria, and to the literal south border of the continent, and also that this cult is still active and the god they were worshipping can actually be resurrected, she just believes them. She straight up bites, hook, line, and sinker. She doesn't have a gram of critical thinking in her poor little smooth brain. Besides her whining, refusing to take responsibility, and completely irrational decision making, there is one more aspect of her personality that does not make sense as to who she is and who she is supposed to be. Now, Christine is a female character written by a female author who behaves as if she was again characterized by a 15-year-old heterosexual boy in the middle of a hormonal battle with himself. She is 16, and yet almost every male character comments on her body in front of her with various levels of vulgarity, and she just accepts it as the norm. She is sexualized on every single page. Other characters hug her, stroke her hair, without asking for permission, and yet none of this disturbs her. Exactly once she shows a tiny bit of sense of self-preservation when she's sure that Alexander, who is walking towards her menacingly, is about to literally assault her in front of all of their friends, which is fully within her right to do because he has mentioned multiple times by that point how much he likes her body and how much he would like to get his hands on her. And so when they're arguing once, he just heads towards her, looking ready to do something, and she gets spooked. And this actually turns out not to be self-preservation, but the fact that her blood sugar or her blood pressure drops, one of those, so she just kind of drops on the ground and is on the verge of panic attack because her body tries to shut down. She's fine later, and she's absolutely sure he wouldn't have done anything, which is fine if you're thinking about your lifelong friends, but those are people she last saw when she was 11. She saw them for the first time in 5 years, and the first thing they all do is ogle her in her completely normal summer clothes, and they talk her about her breasts and her legs and everything. But it's just disgusting. At one point, she's even asleep between two of the characters, and neither of them is Kiru, who she by that point has made out twice with. And they're just hugging her through the waist, through her legs, they're petting her hair, and platonic friendships between men and women are a thing. They completely are. And anyone who argues the opposite should just sit down, take off their headset, take a deep breath, go outside, touch some grass, rethink their life choices. That's fine. There could be platonic relationship between people of different genders. That's fine. The thing is, all the four male characters have made it perfectly clear they don't have platonic intentions towards her. That if she agrees, if she gives even the slightest shred of consent, they would all like to be physically sexual with her. So she just accepts it as completely friendly. Kiru sees nothing wrong, and she keeps referring to all of the male characters in her friend group, including Kiru, as her closest friends. So she groups Kiru with the other three guys. She calls him her friend only. They're never referred to as boyfriends or girlfriends or lovers or whatever you want to call them. And it's really, really strange. But but Christina is never at any moment reacting like the mature balancing force that quite a lot of reviewers seem to call her. Usually this would be the support role given to the one woman in the party, for her to be the nurturing, the caring, the helpful. No, she's just a hindrance. She's just a hindrance everyone wants to sleep with. That's all she is there, and she's also very confused by literally everything. She just doesn't react to the remarks that are given to her about her body, which any developing young woman would be completely disgusted by. She is very attracted to Kiru sexually, but she still groups him completely with the rest of her friends. She doesn't care if they touch her or make remarks at her. And her reckless choices, she thinks they would fix everything, while she just makes everything much worse. Uh, Christina being there really doesn't help anything. It just makes the book much, much worse. And that's just for the main characters. There is quite a lot of secondary characters. The villain, who usually would be the most interesting part, is just Saturday morning cartoon level of personality, where he just wants to take over the world, and he has to fight a bunch of teens with superpowers to do it. You can go watch Teen Titans and get much, much deeper villain from a single episode. Doesn't matter which episode you choose. Just pick a random one, go watch it, and it's going to be much more interesting anyway. The Divine Warriors aren't much better. Kiru's spirit, for example, is a volatile, misogynistic, and aggressive. And that's it. He is also confirmed to have gone to an enemy village, slept with a woman, didn't care if he would get her pregnant, came back to the same village a few years later, raided it, killed everyone, including the same woman, and he, up until this moment, millennia and dimensions away, that he learned and that he cared that he actually has a daughter. So Mr. Responsible right here. He left an actual child of his, and he didn't care about it, and now he suddenly does. But the child, being a shadowy assassin bent on destroying them, somehow again confuses him, because why would she care that he killed her mother and killed all of her people? What sense does this make? Nikolai's spirit, again, not present. Nikolai's powers are questionable. Nobody is sure how exactly they work, but his warrior never makes an appearance. He is confirmed to be as alive as the others, but he's just currently gone. The author apparently thought that slightly chubby Nikolai, with his dream to work at his father's hotel, does not deserve his own muscled, barely decent coast Viking, which is just rude. Maxim's warrior is the other confirmed queer character, and some of the things he says, thinks, and does put him deep into the horrible representation zone. Alexander's spirit is a woman who wears about as much as a gacha character. She is dominant, she is flirty, her favorite pastime is invading people's dreams and giving them nightmares. What a treasure. And Christina's spirit is an androgynous young man, pale, slim, and quiet, who is more often than not referred to not as he or him or by his name Eshion. No, he's just called the silvery creature, which is just charming. Not. It isn't clear what the goal was for him, whether he was meant to be some type of, again, representation to fight gender norms, or just to be weak and crying and weeping all the time, dropping mournful sighs and proclaiming to the skies how beautiful Christina is. He also refuses to be 2 feet away from her. He's just stuck to her by his own choice. They are secondary characters, true, but usually with the main ones so confusingly underdeveloped, readers would turn to side characters to imprint on someone and to be able to latch onto. In this book, though, there is not a single likable character, so this makes the whole process a bit more complicated. Something other than the strange plot and the even strange characterization is the stylistic choice of the book. And this is something I mentioned where people always talk how realistic the portrayal of teenage mind is. And usually, literary analysis does not include personal opinion. It doesn't include the word I. In this case, though, I am going to break the rules of literary analysis. And I'm going to state this. No. No, most of us have been teenagers. Some recently and in this dimension, some a bit further down, a few centuries ago, other lands, etc. But this book is not written in this style because the author wanted to write realistic teenagers. I'm not sure why it was written like this, but this is proven when the point of view is not in the teenagers' heads, but the book is just as unpleasant. Let me explain. The Covenant, elements in the blood, is irrationally focused on sex. This might sound a bit strange, but all of the characters, by the way, involved there are over the legal age of consent in the country the book is set into and also the country the author is from, but the very fact that I had to actually double check this before this video has to tell you something. The book, no matter the point of view character, except for one, spends most of the time describing fantasies, desire for or conversations about sex. Vulgar remarks are thrown at Christina without a care, and vulgar thoughts are thrown at Alexander's spirit warrior, because again, she's an attractive woman wearing not much. As if it is completely normal to talk in this way to someone they would be considering they're a really, really close friend, someone they want to protect, but in regular conversation, this might just make her be afraid of them. Adult men, more than twice her age, vocalize intent. The divine warriors call their humans children or kids, and then in the next breath describe how they would like to teach them about sex in a practical way because they need to learn. And also, Alexander's warrior is barely containing her desire for him. Again, he's 17. While the assassin, the daughter of Kiro's spirit warrior, is looking at Kiro with quite a lot of desire. A bit of side note, Maxim's warrior expressed disappointment that he would not get to witness an act performed by Maxim, which, if I mention the name of this act, this video would get deleted from YouTube. Draw your conclusions. The entire book reads like the next paragraph, it would suddenly get graphic, with multiple people, and yet it never does. The tone and the style feel like a rushed plot of an erotic piece of literature, and the author's strange speech and description patterns only reinforce that impression. The only character excluded from this is actually, big surprise, it's Christina. Christina expresses physical desire and also desire for physical affection with Kirill a couple of times when she marvels how warm she feels when he hugs her, which he does on a few occasions. But she never imagines or talks about having or wanting to have sex in such a graphic way that the men use in every single conversation, because it comes back again and again and again and again. It's all that they think and talk about. And yet she, as the apparently not the only virgin in the book, she is the only one excluded, as she, I am guessing, has to remain pure and virginal and to be the ideal woman, as opposed to Alexander's spirit warrior, who, as she acts as if she used to be promiscuous, she doesn't deserve his approval or his respect. But Christina does, because Christina can do no wrong. Okay, end of the rant. I apologize. Kind of. The big reveal / final battle are about as anticlimactic as possible, but they fully fit within the writer's style, which means they happen off-screen. The team, having mastered the divine powers within an afternoon and then spent a few months honing them, actually lose within minutes to the evil German coming back. And the only reason they lose is because he actually brought people with guns this time. So we have 5 warriors, because that's what they are right now, who have superpowers, and they lose to people with literal guns. So what was the point of everything? Because originally they lost to a man with a gun. They let the evil scientist go, and they basically got beaten up by him because he had a gun. And now, after all of the development in the book, they still lost to a man with a gun. It's kind of sad. In the end, they also get teleported to Iraq. I'm going to say this again. In the end, without much explanation, they get teleported to Iraq, the country. There is some attempt at an explanation, but the book obviously relies on the cliffhanger to hook the readers for the next one. So it's very confusing. As of the current date, which is May 2022, about 2 years after the first book came out, there is no hints or no rumors even of a second book about to be published. Now, the big battle is supposed to be between good and evil, but what are the ideas that battle in this book? What are the concepts? On one hand, we have the 5 friends who are saying their farewells to their past, and they're trying to enter maturity. They're becoming adults. They're abandoning the feral but innocent childhood to become established and mature adults. While the opposing side is the evil German scientist who is abandoning his humanity through sacrifices, literal blood sacrifices, and also through him destroying nature and people, which is shown by him destroying the caves in the mountains, to descend into the beast, which he wants to be because he just wants power. So, in his simple, selfish desire for some confusing concept of power and control over the world, he is destroying humanity and nature, as opposed to, again, the main characters who leave behind the childhood and the innocence, but also the wild side to become adults. So we have the good side and the bad side, and in the end, the bad side does win because again they get beaten by the evil German scientist, and they just go lick their wounds, regroup, and potentially show up the next time. But, well, they made a good versus evil battle, and then the good side lost in the first book, but it was such a rushed and anticlimactic battle that we don't exactly know how and what exactly happened, because the final battle is in the last 10 to 15 pages. Literally, the final battle is in the last end of the book. So it's never really clear what the consequences would be because of the cliffhanger. But nothing is actually clear in this book, especially the ending. So the good side loses. The good side also supposedly fights for, say, the maturity, responsibility, adulthood, but they never actually reach that. So neither of the characters actually grow up mentally. They don't mature, they don't become responsible people, they don't become adults. They just get superpowers, and that's it, and they apparently don't control them well enough to be able to even withstand some people with guns, or to save the people they love, because the plot twist is that the villains are back and they have set the village on fire and are threatening the actual grandparents of the main characters. So the good side loses, but the good side never actually develops. So the whole book leads to nothing. Nothing is achieved, nothing is developed, nobody grows up, no goals are reached. It's just things happen and then it ends with no lessons learned. Also, from a technical point of view, the book isn't edited nearly enough. The point of view character switches multiple times in single paragraph sometimes, which means that it's really difficult to figure out who is thinking what. Plus, the book is mostly written in a third-person omniscient, which just makes the whole thing a bit of a jumbled mess where the reader can't tell who's thinking. The dialogues are a bit easier to distinguish, but the thoughts are just a big ball of yarn messed up and mixed together. Plus, something that's just unpleasant for me personally, the way the author comfortably uses a slur for German people in 2020, and she doesn't only use it when certain characters are talking, she also uses it in omniscient narrator mode, which means that she assumes this is just like a normal way for German people to be referred to, which, at least in the language the book is written in, is actually always a derogatory term for German people, so that's fun. The pacing is about as consistent as Kiro's characterization. Again, it's long, the scenes are drawn out where nothing really happens, the characters are just sitting and talking, while the actual battles happen off screen, are really rushed, or again, the final battle, the actual setting the village on fire and the panic and helplessness, they all happen off screen because the evil scientist just tells them, oh, well, actually the village is already on fire, here's my goons, they're going to shoot you, give me your powers. That's how the book ends. We don't see the village, we don't hear the screams of horror and pain. we don't see the destruction, we're just told the village is on fire. That's it. The whole book should have been rejected the first time it was submitted to the publisher. A lot of editing should have been done, both on the technical side and also on the actual writing style, and then it should have been submitted again. It is a debut novel, that's true, so we could be a bit more lenient with it, and obviously nobody wants their debut novel to be obliterated by reviewers, but this is just not a good book. And you can also see that if you go to check actual reviews, most of the reviews, especially the ones who are 4 and 5 stars on Goodreads, are written by people who are provided free copies from the publisher in exchange for a review. And they have written those good reviews on their blogs and also on Goodreads. So not a lot of people actually bought this book on their own money, read it, liked it, and left a good review. It's just, it just shows up on Goodreads. The prologue, which wasn't mentioned yet, is messy and mixed up to the point where some names get mixed up by the author. We're thrown in a battle scene where there is a huge information dump with names and terms, which by this point the reader has no idea who those people are or what they're trying to do. Also, the people we see in the prologue are already dead in canon. We see their bones, we see their remains, and we see they were actually the hope of the divine warriors, but they just died. So the whole mess of magic, terms, and names in the end means nothing. Also, the prologue is bad, and then the quality just keeps going down. I would say if you're into young adult fantasy, you can definitely give this one a go. It's about 300 pages, so it's not going to keep you occupied for a week or for a month. But you would be, again, a minority because most people who read it didn't actually pay for it. They were provided a free copy for a review. If you simply want a forgettable story, you can, again, do better than this. Plus, the story's most unrealistic aspects actually happen at the very start, because we do have a village which is so cut away from the world that there is no Wi-Fi, there is no 3, 4, or 5G internet connection, phones don't work, so there is no coverage. The tour guide takes tourists to an unnamed cave without a satellite phone or a radio, and apparently this village is completely full of international tourists, even though they barely speak English there. But the most unrealistic part, the bit where I personally draw the line, where my suspense of disbelief fails, is when, in a small remote mountain village, a shop clerk refuses to sell 17-year-old teenagers who he knows. He refuses to sell them beer. That's just... I could have believed everything by that point, except for this. This is just insane. Also, none of the teenagers spends their time smoking, so we don't even know what they do to entertain themselves, since all they have is DVDs that have been there probably longer than they have been going there. Either way, it is a good way to waste time if you would like something a bit fun, if you like something to just analyze or pick apart. But if you're looking for a simply pleasurable read to spend an afternoon or a plane ride with, I wouldn't recommend this. So, this was The Covenant, Elements in the Blood. Thank you for your time and have a good night.